Okay, Shabbat Shalom and welcome to United Israel World Union. This is our Sabbath morning scripture study coming to you live from St. Francisville, Louisiana. Thank you so very much for joining us today. You'll notice behind me that I have a couple of maps. I want your focus to be when I direct you to the map immediately that I'm pointing to. I uploaded a replica of or a copy of this map, similar map, to our Facebook group page. I know some of you don't use Facebook, so I thought about it last night as I prepared the class notes, as I finalized my notes, and I said, you know, I think I need to have that map up. So hopefully, as I point, you'll notice I'm not going to identify these locations yet, but hopefully my pointer is sufficient for the screen. You'll notice that I have red arrows in several locations and a yellow arrow here at the bottom. I'll be identifying these places as I work through, and I want you to think about direction. We're going to be talking about a story. We're going to be working in the text today. We're following our natural order of classes. But I want you to get into the story. I want you to follow Jacob. That's what we're going to do today. So I did mention to John and Lyndon earlier, and some of you can help me. Sometime back I said, you know, it would really be nice if we could find those big maps. You know, the kind, some of you who are maybe my age or older in school or classrooms or Sunday school classes or whatever, big Bible maps that are on a spool. There's several of them. You pull it down. I want something big behind me. Now, there are technological things we can do to put maps on the screen, but I just love these kind of maps, and I think that they're quite instructive. So hopefully the map will be of assistance to us today as we work through some of these geographical points in the story today. Now, I also am excited to announce a project. Now, there is a more formal project announcement coming, but I wanted to let you know that I have come to this idea. I'm going to announce it just briefly. I have a lot of ideas in my mind about things that I want to study and research and write, but nothing interests me as much as the Bible. And so for the last couple of weeks, as I work more and more on the text of the Pentateuch, as I'm working on these classes, and it does take quite a bit of research to pull these classes together, as you might know, I decided what I really need, what you really need, what we really need, what the world really needs is a very good study Bible. And so I thought about it and I said, you know, why don't I begin work on the Pentateuch and take Genesis and put a text, say, I thought about the King James, but I also thought about the ASV, the American Standard Version. It's a time-honored formal translation. It uses a form of the name instead of Lord. It uses Jehovah. It's public domain, so I can use it. My work then becomes a lot more, I think, easy in the sense that I don't have to deal with the translation immediately. So I thought about taking, and I already started this, by the way, taking the text of the ASV for Genesis, putting it into a document, and then beginning to go verse by verse. Just like as I teach, this word is used this many times. See this, 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 and this. And so the work has begun on a Pentateuch project from Horeb Press. Now, I'm not going to announce a date of publication because I don't know yet. But I've worked and talked with the chief officers of United Israel World Union. They're fully supportive and behind this project. And I said, you know, aside from other ministerial duties, I could focus on this tens of hours every week. So the goal would be to produce Genesis, then Exodus, then Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and they would be serially published, one right after the next. And then we would have once the whole thing is done, I could release the Pentateuch with notes and commentary. So that's what the plan is. and I'll be informing you in a more formal way and describing the project in a lot more detail over the next few weeks. So keep that in prayer, and if you want to get behind that and you want to see that come to fruition, stay tuned, because it is coming, and I'm very, very excited about it. So that's a Pentateuch project, and again, releasing one at a time and then all together. Now, we are today in the Patriarchal narratives. We are currently in class 9 of our series, The Pentateuch, A New Look. And we're in a book within the book, a story within the story, called These Are the Bringings Forth of Isaac, or Ele Toledot Isaac. It began, if you recall, back in Genesis chapter 25:19, where the focus shifts to 2 boys that are born through Rebekah. Remember, she is pregnant. Isaac's wife, Rebekah, or his woman, Rebekah, is pregnant with twins. And so this story, Ele Toledot Isaac, began 2 weeks ago with the Pentateuch reading that's known as Toledot. Now, I'm going to be talking to you this morning. We're going to start in Hosea chapter 12. So if you'll go with me to Hosea chapter 12, and I want to talk to you a little bit about a prophetic picture, or the way that the prophet remembers the stories that we're covering now. So in Hosea chapter 12, if you look, now the verses are different in the Hebrew and the English, but in Hosea chapter 12 and verse 3, you'll see immediately that we're talking about Jacob here. It's verse 4 in Hebrew, 3 in English. In the womb, he took his brother by the heel. Now, the 2 boys, according to Genesis chapter 25, you remember, Rebekah goes to seek Jehovah over the boys that are battling in the womb. And she's told through a divine oracle, God tells her that there are 2 nations, 2 peoples, and they're fighting in the womb. Well, these 2 boys, Jacob and Esau, fought not only in the womb, but they strove against one another in life. They fought in life, and enmity and jealousy ultimately drove them apart. You recall the story, Jacob is warned by his mother that Esau is going to kill him because of his anger over the birthright and the blessing episode that we read about. And so he flees at his mother's advice, his mother's plan, to a place called Aram Naharaim, to a place that patriarchs and matriarchs are from, the home of his ancestors, and he's there for one reason. Well, he's there for 2 reasons. He's one there for safety, for his life. And the other is for a wife. His mother sends him there to get a woman, and it's there that he meets his match, Uncle Laban. Now, by the way, on the way, he encounters, Hebrew says malakim. Sometimes it's translated angels. You remember the story of the sulam, the ladder which reached from the ground to heaven and so forth. While he's away, lessons are learned. We get the impression the writer, the author, wants us to know that Jacob is learning valuable lessons. I covered those in previous classes. After he's been there a little bit more than 20 years, he flees again. And this time, he's with women and children. That also is covered in Hosea chapter 12 and verse 13. Remember, I talked about that last week. The English generally is understood to mean that he fled to Aram, and there he served for a wife, and for a wife he kept sheep. But as I pointed out last week, the preposition to is not in there. It's not talking about his flight to Aram in Hosea 12:13, but his flight from Aram with a woman and with a woman. And that was indicated, and I proved that to you by the next verse, which deals with, shows forth evidence of Hebrew parallelism where Israel fled from Egypt. All right, so Hosea 12 is picking up on this idea of Jacob. Jacob becomes sort of an underlying key, if you will, to understanding Hosea chapter 12. Now, one of the things that I want to look at now this morning is go back to Hosea chapter 12 and verse 3, and let's pick up there again. And by the way, I happen to notice Betty Given points out Hosea 12 as part of this week's Haftorah. Well, the reason is because this is clearly a reference in Hosea 12 to the Torah portion that we're looking at. So Hosea chapter 12, verse 3, verse 4 in the Hebrew, in the womb he took his brother by the heel. This translation says, and in his manhood he had power with God. Yea, he had power over the angel and prevailed. He wept and made supplication unto him. He found him at Bethel, and there he spoke with us. Now I want to unpack that for just a moment. In his strength, uvono, in his strength, he strove with Elohim. What does that mean? Sounds like we have a confrontation between Jacob and God. It says, and he strove with a malach, sometimes translated angel or a messenger, and he prevailed, or he was able. So what we get is this idea that Jacob fought with God, he fought with an angel, and he was successful. Now, he wept and sought his favor. At Bethel, he found him, and there he spoke with us. Now, some translations there say, and there he spoke with him. Well, it's because if you read it contextually, the translator, the old saying is that the translator is a traitor. The translator looks at this and he says, spoke with us? That doesn't mean him, it means us. The question that I begin today's class with is there something about the story of Jacob, especially encounters at a place called Bethel, that have to do with us, meaning later generations? Is something that was spoken there meant to communicate down through the ages? Now, the question that sort of is in the background here is, with whom does Jacob struggle? Who is this that Jacob is fighting? Now, if you look at Hosea 12, it continues, he found him at Bethel, there he spoke with us. Even Jehovah, the God of hosts, Jehovah is his memorial name. Is Jacob fighting God? Who is this that he engages in a struggle? That's what we're going to look at this morning. Is it an angel? Is it the Malach? Jehovah of hosts? This is one of the strangest encounters ever. Today we join Jacob and his family as they prepare to meet Esau. Remember, when he leaves, he's fleeing for his life. Esau wants to mourn his father, and by the way, even now his father is still alive, as we'll see. But Jacob flees for his life. He now has been told, go back to the land, and one of the things that's taking his mind and has him worried is the fact that he now has to meet once again with his brother, and as far as he knows, his brother may still want to kill him. He doesn't know. So he's apprehensive. On the one hand, he's been told by God to go home, and on the other, he has to face Esau. Now go with me to Genesis chapter 32. Genesis chapter 32, and I'll be using the map today quite a bit, so be ready. And Jacob, verse 3 in the English, verse 4 in the Hebrew, Vayishlach Yaakov Malakim. And Jacob sent messengers. Now remember, Jacob keeps encountering these messengers. Now, are the messengers that Jacob sent, are they messengers like people messengers, or are they angels? It's kind of hard to tell, because sometimes when we see Malak, we think of an angelic being. At other times, we think of someone purely human, and you have to pay real close attention. But it says, and Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, unto the land of Seir, the field of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, thus shall ye say unto my lord Esau, thus saith your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. And I have oxen and asses and flocks and men servants and maid servants, and I have sent to tell my Lord that I may find favor in thy sight. So he sends these messengers unto Seir, the field of Edom. Now I want you to notice, first of all, that Jacob and the family are here. Can you see on my map? They're at the place called, sometimes some translations call it the river Yavok or Jabbok in English. It is here on the Transjordan. Remember, here's the Jordan River here, and this is the wadi. I would call it a wadi. In the desert, you don't necessarily have rivers, but you have wadis, which are dry riverbeds that, given the right situation, can be flooded rivers. The water cuts through. So this is, let's call this the Wadi Yavok. And you'll see as we work through. But this is where he is. But he sends messengers to a place that in the Hebrew or in the Bible here says the land of Seir. Now, my map, this is, look on your map, you'll see it more clearly. I have a yellow arrow pointing south because Seir and Edom is below or south of the Dead Sea. This is where it's generally considered the land of Edom and Seir. Now, geography becomes more and more important to us because as we progress, particularly when we get into the wilderness itineraries and where are the tribes at, I want you to understand we're going to let the text tell us where these places are. And by the way, maps are made by people. A lot of these great maps were made a long time ago. The best maps begin to be put together in the 19th century by the Palestine Exploration Fund and some of these guys. So, but the way they determine locations is they read their Bible like you're doing, like I'm doing. And they say, oh, wait a minute, that's where that is. The context tells me. And quite often we can prove those places, those locations through other means, archaeology and so forth. But Edom and the land of Seir, it's not a point on the map. It's an area. It's a region. Edom and Seir, this region, Edom, extends on both sides of this rift in which the Jordan River is, but south here in the Arava, in the plains. All right? So he sends messengers to this particular place. Now, the English says the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Now, we're going to get into this as we work through Esau and Edom, and is it a place, is it a person? We're talking about a country? Well, the Hebrew doesn't say country. The Hebrew says Sedeh Edom. Sedeh Edom. Sedeh is a field. The field of Edom. Now, that phrase only occurs Sededom only occurs in one other text in the Bible. You know I love these. By the way, this is the kind of stuff I'll put in our commentary series. Judges chapter 5. Go there with me. Judges chapter 5. We're going to look for the only other reference to the phrase Sededom. Judges 5:4. Jehovah, when you went forth out of Seir, when you marched out of the field of Edom, the earth trembled, the waters, the heavens also dropped. Yea, the clouds dropped water. The mountains quaked at the presence of Jehovah. Even yon Sinai at the presence of Jehovah, the God of Israel. Now, again, this is just a taste. I know some of you want to believe that that Sinai is in Saudi Arabia, but I won't laugh out loud. We'll get to that later as we work through the text. But I will say, I'm very opinionated about this, by the way, but I will say that we're talking about a region in the south, Edom, Seir. Jehovah comes from there. Boy, it'd be nice if we could figure out just where is it. By the way, you wonder why some of us love to go to Biblical Tamar Park in this region, this wonderful place in the desert, which is just north of what's called Paran. You know that from another text which deals with where Jehovah's coming from. Okay, so he sends messengers, according to this text, to this area here south of the Dead Sea. This region is a place of holiness where one might expect to have a divine encounter, or a place we might expect that from this place God would come. But Jacob isn't expecting the arrival of God from Sededom. He's anxious, he's expecting his brother to come from that region. In fact, in verse 6, if you go back to Genesis chapter 32, Genesis 32 and verse 6, it says, and the messengers returned to Jacob. Remember, he sends them out, go find my brother. And they come back and they said, we came to your brother Esau, and moreover, he cometh to meet you with 400 men with him. Now, how do you think Jacob feels now? Esau's coming with 400 men. So he's afraid. He divides his family into two camps. Now, today's class is a little bit different in that I'm going to keep working through, digging in, because this is the way you have to. Some classes you can work more on a topical. In this class, it's more conducive to a go through it, dig deep, go through the whole thing. So bear with me, we've got a lot to cover. But he prays, he's concerned, he prays. Look at chapter 32, verse 9. By the way, he puts them in two groups. Why does he do that? Because his idea is that if, God forbid, Esau attacks one group and demolishes or kills, destroys, he's got the other group. That's his thought, is that half can get away. So here's what he says in his prayer in verse 9. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, the God of my father Isaac, O Jehovah, who said unto me, return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will do thee good. I'm not worthy of the least of all the loving kindness and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto your servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I have become two companies. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and smite me, the mother with the children. And you said, I will surely do you good and make your seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. You want to know how to pray? Read the patriarchal narratives. Put me in remembrance of my words, saith the prophet. These patriarchs, they called upon God, and notice the way Jacob puts it, you said to me, come back. Remember when Jacob left, he told God, look, if you take care of me and you bring me back safely, then you'll be my God. A lot of boldness in these prayers. I love them. So he sends gifts ahead of him. He wants to appease his brother. He's hopeful that by showering Esau with gifts and letting him know that he comes in peace and bearing much wealth, that Esau will accept him and not kill him. But he prepares for the worst. He gets them across the Yavok. So here's the Yavok. Now this is a difficult part in the geography, because we know that he's coming from Padan Aram. We know that he's come this way. Notice I'm just generally pointing. It says he puts them on the other side of the Yavok. The question becomes, and this could be it, most commentators who study this believe that they would have come down more on an easterly side and would have therefore already crossed the Yavok closer to what is known as the King's Highway. But then when he's here, he's got from the south, he's expecting Esau to come, so he puts them safely on the other side of the Yavok. Notice, Yavok has a northern side, it splits north-south basically. So the question is, where does he put them? But he's left alone. Look at chapter 32, verse 24. 32, verse 24. Let me make sure this is the right verse I want to read. Yeah, okay, verse 24, which is 25 in the Hebrew. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was strained as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob said to him, tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, wherefore is it that thou ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of that place Peniel, for he said, I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And the sun rose upon him as he passed over Penuel, and he limped upon his thigh. Therefore the children of Israel do not eat the sinew of the hip, which is upon the hollow of the thigh, unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh and the hip. Now, a lot to unpack there, but we're going to talk about the struggle that takes place. Now, if you look at your map, and on my map, we have this place called Peniel. It's right near the Yavok, by the Wadi Yavok. This is where this encounter takes place. Now, the first thing I want to point out that's missed in some translations is that we have what's something similar to alliteration that's going on in the Hebrew. There are several words which sound alike. They have the same or similar sounds. We have Yaakov at the Yavok, who wrestles v'Yavok. He wrestles Ya'avok. Now, Avok, that's translated wrestle, this is a word, if you look it up and you do a study, you're going to find that there's some academic disagreement going on there. But I want to show you what I think that I've discovered this week. This word sometimes is associated with the root, Aleph, Bet, Kof, which is understood to mean dust, or to kick up dust. Now, if you've ever been in this area, there is dust. We have dust storms, in fact, that blow in. But the ground is hard, and on the top is dust. And you can imagine two people going at it, and their feet are sliding as they grapple and shove one another, and the dust is coming up. this is the idea of avok. They're getting dirty. As the English says, they wrestled. Now, avok can be translated as wrestle. It can be translated as stir up dust, and maybe there's a connection between those two. But some say that it's derived from another root, which I think it is. And that is a root word that is, the letters are het, beit, kof. And that means to intertwine or to embrace. They're locked up. Now, very close, very similar. Now, I want you to think about that because it comes back. But also remember that what we're doing is we're looking at these words that sound similar. Yaakov, Yavok, Yaavok, they're wrestling. Now, it says in this match, in this struggle, whoever he's wrestling with says, let me go. Now, I think the English says, let's see where he tells him, let me go because the day breaks is what it says here. But literally in the Hebrew, it's the dawn rises. The dawn rises. Now you go, well, the day breaks. I see how they get that, but I like the idea that you have the dawn is coming up. Look, let me give you an example. By the way, that phrase that's translated, the dawn rises, is used 6 times in the Bible. I just want to look at one to show you the difference in sunrise and sunset in this idea. Go with me to the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 4 and verse 15 in the Hebrew. In the English, it's a big difference. It's chapter 4, verse 21. Nehemiah 4:21, English 4:15 in the Hebrew. So he wrought in the work, and half of them held the spears from the rising of the morning until the stars appeared. You see, the rising of the morning. That's our word here. So whoever Jacob is wrestling says, let me go. The dawn is rising. Now, the one that he's wrestling with says this. Go back to Genesis 32. Genesis 32 and verse 27 in the English, verse 28 in the Hebrew. Let me go, for the day breaks. He said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said unto him, what is your name? A question becomes, is Jacob's opponent unaware of his name? Or is he getting to something here? Jacob replies, my name is Yaakov. And he says in verse 29, after he tells him, verse 28 in the English, your name shall no more be called Yaakov, but Israel, for you've striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Now, this ties us back to the Hosea 12 passage. But I want you to look at the next verse. Jacob asked him, because remember, we're still trying to figure out who's he wrestling. Jacob says, tell me what your name is. And here's what he says. The English says, wherefore is it that thou ask after my name? And in the Hebrew, it says, let me look at this phrase. I'm looking for the Hebrew here. Let's see. The verses are different. Let me make sure I'm in the right place. He says, Lama ze tisha'al lishmi. What is this that you ask for my name? Now that phrase, and this is important, that phrase, just as I read it, occurs in only one other place. And maybe it'll give us an idea of who it is that's speaking. Someone else in the Bible was asked, "What's your name?" And in that other place, this person used the exact same reply. You ready? Go with me to Judges chapter 13. In Judges chapter 13, it says, look at verse 18 with me. And the angel of Jehovah, the Malach Yehovah, said to him, Lama ze tisha'al lishmi. What is this you ask after my name? Now, it could be that this is the typical response of the Malach. If you ask the Malach Jehovah, remember, we know the Malach Jehovah. Our first encounter is in the desert where the Malach Jehovah meets with Hagar. Now, does the Malach Jehovah have a name? That's the question. Jacob wants to know. Now, it's interesting here that in Judges chapter 13 and verse 18, he says, Lama ze tisha'al lishmi. Why do you ask after my name? And then he says, Vahu Pele. And it is Pele. Now, most translations say it's wonderful, like it's too wonderful for me to tell you my name. But I don't think that's the way the Hebrew reads. I think the Malach says, why do you ask after my name? Vahu Pele. It's Pele. His name is Pele. Now that reminds me, and I'm not going to go there, but I just want to say this because it just hit me. In Isaiah chapter 9, we have the birth of this child who is to come. Typically, it's translated, the child's name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. In the Hebrew of Isaiah chapter 9, it says, Vayikra Shemo, and he will call his name Pele. And he will call his name Pele, Yoetz El Gibor Aviad Sar Shalom. So is there a connection? I don't know. It's for another class. But the idea is that here we have the Malach is wrestling with Jacob. I think I've come up with enough evidence here to suggest that Jacob is not wrestling with anyone other than the Malach. Now, who is this Malach? Very interesting, because when you look at Hosea chapter 12, you get this poetic description of the fight. He strove with Elohim, he fought with the Malach, and then it says his name is Jehovah of Hosts. Very interesting. So we're going to have a whole class. I think Dr. Tabor talked a little bit about that in a previous class. Now, in chapter 32 of Genesis, go back there, Genesis 32. Genesis 32 and verse 30 in the English, 31 in the Hebrew. Says he called the name of the place Peniel because I've seen God face to face and my life is preserved. So this idea, he believes that he's encountered a divine being. Jacob does. Now, is it a dream? Some commentators say it's a dream. Doesn't sound like a dream. Does it sound like a dream to you? A lot of times in the Hebrew Bible, when it's a dream, you know what it says? And there was a dream. This doesn't say it's a dream. So it seems that it's an actual encounter with a divine being. Now, this thing where he says face to face, panim el panim, do a study on that on your own time, but there's that phrase is used 5 times. It's very interesting. You know, Moses meets panim el panim. Genesis 32:31 is where we're at, but Exodus 33:11, Deuteronomy 34:10 says Moses knew God panim el panim. But anyway, now look at chapter, let's see, let's go down to, look at verse, just to make one point before we move on. In verse 32, it says the children of Israel don't eat this part of the meat. Why is it? to this day. Now, be on the lookout as we work through this. I'll draw all of these kind of things out in my commentary, but I want you to think where it says, ad hayom, unto this day, that's something that is anachronistic, meaning a contemporary writer is not, the person writing is not like witnessing the wrestling match. It's someone much later who says, oh, and by the way, the story I just told you, to this day, meaning a non-contemporary time, much later, we still don't eat this because of this story, right? It's a clue, it's a flag. Now, chapter 33, Esau's on his way. He divides his family. He's got Leah with her children. He's got Rachel with her children. He's got the handmaids with their children. Now, as Esau heads towards him, Jacob bows to the ground. Jacob begins to walk forward. He's in front of the girls and the kids. He starts walking towards. Now, look, they're coming. Dust is flying up. Imagine 400 people are coming towards you. As he's walking, he's bowing to the ground. He does this 7 times as Esau approaches. He's saying, I'm your servant, I'm your servant, I'm your servant. Now remember, before he moves out and in the interval of time, there have been people going forward showering Esau with gifts. He still doesn't know. All he sees is dust. Now, behind him, the women and kids are in a certain order. This family is dysfunctional. You have to think about this. If you're a handmaiden and you got your kids, you're the first to get whacked if this thing goes bad. You know what that does to a family? Hey, you stepkids, come up to the front. This might get ugly. Come on, Dan. Come on, let's get up here. And then behind the handmaids, Bilhah and Zilpah, you have Leah. She's next. If this goes bad, Leah and the kids, they're in trouble. And then Rachel and Joseph. They're the last to go. Now, you know Rachel is Jacob's favorite. So does everybody know that. And you know who else knows it? Leah and all her kids, and Zilpah and her kids, and Bilhah and her kids. Look, let's just call it like it is. So here's the order that they're going. Now, verse 4 says this, and it says Esau runs to him, and it says he embraces him. Now, remember when I told you that some scholars think that the wrestle is from a root avok, aleph, beit, kof, but I think it's from the root het, beit, kof. The reason I have to do this is because I want you to see something. Here, when Esau embraces Jacob, it's that rare root word, het, beit, kof. Just as the night before, he embraces and intertwines with this malak named Pele, here he embraces and intertwines with his brother. Esau falls on his neck. They kiss. They shed tears. And in verses 5 through 7, you'll notice this very touching scene where a procession of the women and children come up and they bow before Esau. So you have the handmaids, they bow, and Jacob says, this is my handmaid Bilhah and Zilpah, and these are the kids. And Esau's looking at it and he goes, and this is my wife Leah and the children, and he introduces them. And Esau, I want you to imagine this, they're still weeping. This is all going on right here. This is happening right here. And this beautiful family reunion, if you will. Esau says, hey, what is it? What is it about these gifts that you sent? I have plenty. I don't need your gifts. And Jacob says, listen, if I have found favor in your eyes, please accept it. I just want to take just a moment. I love this phrase that we see in the Bible 36 times. Matzah hin. Matzah. To find favor. You know what I want to do every day of my life? Is find favor with man and God. If we did this as a race, as a human race, where we looked for opportunities to find favor, look, the world would be a better place. So think about that. I'm not going to go through all the 36, but do a study. You can look at the English. Look for the find favor. In other words, void points of contention where possible. Why would you not try to find favor? Why would you instigate things? That's the world we live in. Enough of that. Now, but the idea is that when, I want you to see this, when Esau embraces him, it reminds us of the fight that happened the night before. And it's not missed by Jacob. Look at verse 10. Jacob says, I pray you, if I found favor in your sight, receive my present at my hand. For as much as I have seen your face, as one sees the face of God, and you were pleased with me. Just like he wrestled Chavok with the Malach Yehovah the night before, so Chavok, he embraces his brother, and he said, you know, the face I saw last night looks just like yours to me. He sees Esau as a divine messenger in a way. And Esau brings a message of peace. He had every right to still be mad as far as right goes. But remember the old saying, sometimes you can be right and not do right. Esau is touched by the family that he meets, and he said, look, I'm going to leave some people with you. We're going to make sure that you get to Seir. Look, you're right here. We're just going right over here. That's a long journey with women and children and flocks. And so Esau wants to help him get there, and they're going to, we're going to all go together. And Jacob says, you go ahead. You go ahead. The pace, this is in chapter 33, verse 12 and 13. He said the pace of the journey needs to be considerate of the women, the children, and the flocks. They'll die. I mean, we've got to take our time. You run ahead to Seir. Now, the question I have for you is, does Jacob go to Seir? Listen to me. Ever. Just a question. So Esau leaves. Verse 16 says he makes his way to Seir. Now Jacob, it says in verse 17 of chapter 33, look at this, chapter 33, verse 17. And Jacob came in, back up, and Jacob journeyed to Sukkot. So here he is at Peniel, and he goes to Sukkot. Find that on your map. It's just right to the west of Peniel on most maps. By the way, some of these maps have question marks. Is it right here? Is it right here? But generally, Sukkot is not very far. He leaves Peniel, and he goes to Sukkot. Look at this. Sound like he's on his way to Seir? It says he built him a house and made booths for his cattle. And therefore, the name of the place is called Sukkot. So Jacob stays at Sukkot. We don't know how long. It doesn't tell us how long. But he hadn't gone far. He's still east of the Jordan Rift. Now, look at verse 18. And Jacob came in peace to the city of Shechem. Look, if you're looking at the map that I posted, it's point number, what is it? 2? Did I put a 2 on the little red? Look over here at Shechem. It's the next red arrow. He goes from Peniel at the river Yavok to Shechem. You see where that is? And it says it's in the land of Canaan when he came from Padan Aram and encamped before the city. And then it goes on to tell us that Jacob, he bought the parcel of ground, look at verse 19, where he had spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money, and he erected there an altar and called it El Elohei Israel. So here he is, the family is at Shechem, he buys a piece of land from a guy named Hamor, and that's where the family's at. Now, by the way, this place is, it's going to be important later. Look with me, go with me to Joshua chapter 24, verse 32. This is going to be something that happens much later. Joshua 24, 32. And the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel brought up out of Egypt, buried they in Shechem, in the parcel of ground which Jacob bought of the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money, and they became the inheritance of the children of Joseph. So this area here, Joseph, we think Joseph is a young person. I don't think he's a baby, a little kid so much. But remember, they leave Padan Aram when Joseph, after Joseph, his birth is mentioned. So how old is he? I don't know. It doesn't give us enough information to make that determination. But Joseph is going to be here at Shechem. This is his inheritance. And the family lives there a little bit. Go back with me to Genesis 34. And I'm going to work through this story to tell the story pretty quickly, because I have some more stuff I want to cover. Dinah, Genesis 34, is the daughter of Leah and Jacob. And it says that she goes out to see the daughters of the land. The daughters of the land. And Shechem is the son of Hamor the Hivite. Now the Hivite is a group of Canaanite people. It's mentioned 18 times. By the way, when I do the commentary, you'll have all 18, and you can just simply open it up and say, wow, that's pretty cool, Ross. Thank you very much. Shechem sees Dinah. And this is me telling you the story as I feel it when I get into the text. He's smitten. He thinks that she's beautiful. He crosses the line, evidently. Some say rape, some argue it wasn't rape. But it does seem that he, for certain, forces himself. It says that he took her, he lay with her, and the word is generally translated, he humbled her. But it can be given this idea that it's not voluntary. It's not necessarily consensual. I don't know. I've said the opposite in the past, but the more I study this deeply, he certainly coerces her, it seems, from the text. And the thing that we get in the next verse, in verse 3, though, is he does love her. But love doesn't do that, right? So he goes too far, maybe, but it says he loves her and he spoke to her heart. Now, that indicates to me, it doesn't say that her heart received it necessarily, but generally that's the idea. When you speak to the heart, translators often miss this, but it's in the prophets as well, in Isaiah. The idea is to speak tenderly, and it generally implies that the heart receives the message. So I do get the idea, my understanding of the text is that he gets inside her heart. And he asked his father to talk to the family because he wants to take Dinah as his woman. And meanwhile, Jacob hears what's happened. Now, I don't know if Dinah tells him or if word spreads through the desert and he hears about it in town. I don't know. But he hears about it and he keeps it silent The boys are away. They're taking care of the flocks. He doesn't let anybody know that he knows. He remains silent until they come. Meanwhile, the boys get word. It says that they're grieved and they're angry. So they make their way back. Now, as they're coming back, Hamor addresses, this is verse 8 through 12 of chapter 34, Hamor addresses Jacob and the boys. And he presents a proposal. He says, look, we'll intermarry, your group and my group, and you can dwell and trade here. You know, it sounds like a proposal to do business and to open up, and the goal is to be one people. And verse 13, look at verse 13, chapter 34. Verse 13 says, and the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father with guile, and spake because he had defiled Dinah their sister. Guile. The word is deceit. So he deceitfully, they give the impression that they're going to work it out. Hey, let's work out this proposal you got there, Hamor and Shechem. We're going to, we can intermarry, but we got a problem. It's not acceptable to us that you boys aren't circumcised. So you need to all go be circumcised. And if you're circumcised, okay, then we can be one people. All the males have to be circumcised. Or here's the option. If you don't do that, we'll take our daughter and go. Verse 14 through 17. In verse 18, it says that they accept the plan. The people of Shechem, they accept it. In fact, Shechem and Hamor go back to the people in verse 19 through 24. I'm rolling through this pretty quickly to make some points. And they present the plan. Look, we talked to the people, you know, Yaakov and the families there, and we can intermarry. The men of the town accept it. So they all circumcise themselves according to the narrative. And then in verse 25, look at verse 25. It says, and it came to pass on the third day when they were sore, that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took each man his sword and came upon the city unawares and slew all the males. Now, by the way, the Hebrew there is batach. It can mean trust or security. The impression that I get when I read this is they were trusted into the city, like the people see them coming, but they don't expect anything because they were just talking to them 3 days ago and they said, you know, we can intermarry. So they tricked them. They used false trust to get in the midst of them, and then they unleash hell on this place. Now, a lot of people, they want to protect and defend the actions. This is righteousness because that bad boy did this to so-and-so, so we're justified in our response. Well, look at their response. Look at their response. They killed every male. Verse 26, including Shechem and Hamor. Kill all of them. Now, some people are saying, yeah, but the guy did rape Dinah. They killed the whole town. Verse 27. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain. Look, the dead bodies are everywhere in the town. Came upon the slain and plundered the city because they defiled their sister. They took their flocks, their herds, their asses, and that which was in the city and that which was in the field, and all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives they took captive and made prey even all that was in the house. They took everything. Now, some people say, hey, fair is fair. Well, that's not what Jacob thought. That's not what Jacob thought at all. Jacob was hurt by what they did to his daughter, no doubt. I think he was hurt. Look, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, and I haven't always been a biblical preacher. I don't know what I would do. God forbid that something like this happened, because I don't know what I would do. I wouldn't want to be the other person, because I might just be another Ross. I'm not saying that I would handle it, with kid gloves. I don't know. But I do know this. Jacob says the following. Look at verse 30. Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You've troubled me, to make me odious to the inhabitants of the land among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And I, being few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and smite me, and I shall be destroyed, I and my house." He's sick over this. They're going to kill us. The inhabitants of the land are going to kill us, boys. They destroyed the whole place and kidnapped all the children and took their women. And you know what the boys said? Should he deal with our sister as a harlot? No, I get you, Simeon and Levi, but don't do that, my God. Now look at Genesis 49, by the way. Genesis 49, verse 5. This is what Jacob says about the boys. Simeon and Levi are brethren. Weapons of violence are their swords. O my soul, come not thou into their council, unto their assembly. My glory, be not thou united. For in their anger they slew a man. In their self-will they hocked an ox or hamstring. They're just cruel as hell, is what he's saying. Simeon and Levi, cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And by the way, Genesis 49 says, gather around me, sons, and I'll tell you what will befall you in the Acharit Hayamim, in the latter days. So what happens is exactly what Jacob says, but that's for a later class. So after the massacre, what happens? They're here. They got to get out of town. Now, it just so happens that right after the massacre, God says, Jacob, you need to leave. Look at chapter 35, verse 1. Genesis 35, verse 1. Now, a lot of people don't do this when they study. They don't notice that the departure out of Shechem is right after Jacob says the inhabitants of the land are going to kill me. And God said unto Jacob, arise and go to Bethel, and dwell there, and make there an altar unto God who appeared unto you when you fled from the face of Esau your brother. So here they are in Shechem. They started in Padan Aram. They came here, Penuel. They moved to Sukkot. They moved then to Shechem. Now they're headed south. They go to Bethel. Right after the massacre, after the cruel massacre of the inhabitants of the land, they go here to Bethel. And once they get there, and by the way, remember, he says, I just read, this is where you were when you met God on your way out of the land. So in Genesis 28, he's at Bethel, and it even says that he named it Bethel because there he had the dream 20-something years earlier. Now, I don't know how much time has elapsed since he left Padan Aram to this point. It could be another 10 years. We just don't know. It doesn't say. It doesn't say. But what we do know is he's about to go to Bethel. Now, I want to add something here that the text tells us. Before they leave Shechem, Jacob says, you got to get the idols out. Remember, Rachel stole Daddy's idols, so they have these, they're called Elohei HaNekar. Elohei HaNekar. They're the foreign gods. He tells them, we got to get rid of the foreign gods. Give me your earrings and the foreign gods. And while they're at Shechem, they give up the idols and the earrings. Some, by the way, some say that these earrings are on the idols. It's kind of hard to tell in the Hebrew, but nonetheless, the idolatry piece of what they had in their baggage goes in a tree right there. They bury it right there. Now, the cities we read in verse 5 are terrified of this family. Can you imagine? Jacob and the boys are on the move. You know, I mean, the word spreads. And they're terrified. Now, a lot of times people read this and they go, you know, hey, they deserve it. All right. Jacob, it says in verse 6, comes to Luz. Look down at chapter 35, verse 6. So Yaakov came to Luz, which is in the land of Canaan. Remember this from last week, Bethel? It was formerly called Luz until Jacob names it. Notice in our text here, it says he came to Luz, the same as Bethel. Anachronism, it's a later scribe. Now remember, the Bible will update names, because if Jacob names Bethel, Luz, Bethel, then in Genesis chapter 12 and verse 8 and chapter 13 verse 3, where it says that Abraham went to Bethel, he did not. No one knew it as Bethel at the time. He went to Luz. So Jacob comes to Luz. There he builds an altar, and this is where God had spoke with him or with us. Remember our passage from Hosea, chapter 12. Now, where it says in verse 7, he built an altar where God revealed himself. Let me look at it. He builded there an altar and called the place El Bethel, because there God was revealed to him. Interestingly enough, that word in Hebrew can be the same word that often is associated with the idea of exile. So God revealed himself, but God also exiled him from there. Just an interesting point. Now, by the way, one thing I don't want to miss, speaking of prophetic glimpses, when they're here at the Yavok, as they come back into the land, it says in chapter 32, verse 3, that they're at a place called Mahanaim, and that means the two camps. As a prophetic picture, when Jacob prays, he says, I left this place with just my staff in my hand, and now I've become two camps. Okay, think prophetically. When Jacob goes out of the land, when he comes back, he's in two camps, Mahanaim. Now, years ago, I saw this, and other people have pointed it out as well. That's what seems to point towards a prophetic picture. Go with me quickly while we're thinking about that. Look at Song of Songs. Song of Songs, chapter 6, verse 13 in the English, chapter 7, verse 1 in the Hebrew. Now, you know, the Song of Songs is sometimes interpreted as an allegory, a love story between God and his people. And in chapter, Song of Songs 6:13 or 7:1 in Hebrew, return, return, O Shulamite, return, return, that we may look upon you. Why should we look upon the Shulamite as upon the dance of Mahanaim? The returning one is called for in the four directions of the earth. Return, 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 return. The Shulamite means the restored one, So when the restored one comes back, what's it going to look like? It's going to look like the story of Mahanaim, the two camps. Okay. And it's also important in that same understanding to think that Israel needs to put those idols away. So if you're listening to me, you are from Israel, you think you're from Israel, you want to be from Israel, you want to be on God's side, put the idols away. Bury them under a tree. Not in your yard. Use another place. I wouldn't want it in your yard. All right. But they're going south. So they're leaving Shechem. They're in Bethel now. But on their way, not there yet, on their way, a strange notice is what we get. Rivka's nurse, Deborah, dies. Now, by the way, we don't have any mention of Rivka's death. We don't know when Rebekah dies. The Bible doesn't tell us about her death. It does tell us she was buried, so she does die. It's not one of those Enoch or Elijah stories. She dies. We don't know where it happened or whatever, but that's mentioned there. Now look at chapter 35, Genesis 35, and verse 9. And God appeared unto Jacob again when he came from Padan Aram and blessed him. Now this is kind of strange. He appeared unto him again when he came from Padan Aram. Well, how far back was that? When he came from Padan Aram, he's already been to Yavok. He encountered the angel. He moved to Sukkot. He built a house there. He moved to Shechem. The episode with Dinah, the slaughter. He's gone. And now it says when he came from Padan Aram. Now, but stick with me. And God said unto him, your name Jacob. Your name shall not be called any more Jacob, but Israel shall be your name. And he called his name Israel. Well, that's interesting. It sounds familiar. And God said unto him, I am El Shaddai, be fruitful and multiply. A company of nations shall come of you. Kings shall come out of your loins. And the land which I gave unto Abraham and Isaac to give, I will give it to you. And to your seed after you I'll give the land. And God went up from him in the place where he spoke to him, and Jacob set up a pillar in a place where he spoke with him, pillar of stone, and he poured out a drink offering thereon and poured oil thereon. And Jacob called the name of the place where God spake with him Bethel. Wow, all of that sounds familiar. Sounds similar to the story in chapter 32, where there's an encounter, and the name change. Your name's no longer going to be called Jacob anymore. It's going to be called Israel. But this is another story that tells us a similar story. And you could say, well, it's fine. Chronologically, it's fine. It just happened again. Okay. It's also similar to chapter 28, commemorating his departure. He sets up a pillar. He anoints it. He names it Bethel. Now, that could be the person recording this is just saying, and that's where God spoke with him. And remember, he called it Bethel. But the stories are very similar, leading some to believe that these are two separate sources on how Jacob's name is changed to Israel. Now, the other interesting thing about the name change is that Jacob is still called Jacob after this. He was still called Jacob after the first incident we read the first naming in Genesis 32, and he will still be sometimes called Jacob, sometimes Israel. But they're on the road again. On the road again. They're leaving Bethel. And they're on the way to Beit Lechem. So they're, again, Shechem to Bethel to Beit Lechem. They're headed south. And this is in Genesis 35, verse 16 through 20. Southward towards Ephrat. Now, how many of you know the Hebrew alphabet? This is the Hebrew letter Hey. This letter is sometimes placed on the end of a place name to indicate direction. It's called in the old Hebrew grammars the Hey directive. I think newer grammars call it something else. But the idea is that if I want to say towards the Negev, I say Negba. You hear the ah on the end. If I want to say towards Ephrat, I say Ephratah. If I want to say toward, you just put the hay on there. Now in this particular passage, it says that he's headed towards Ephrat. So he's on the way. Now Beit Lechem and Ephrat, look on most maps and you'll see the two are close together. Sometimes they're tied together as like a town in the suburb. But it's very specific. It's towards Ephrat. It's how the gospel writer thinks that Micah 5 is a place, even though Micah 5 says it's talking about a family. It says, but you, Beit Lechem Ephratah, you, Bethlehem, towards Ephrat. You see? But then it says you're small among the clans of Judah. But anyway, look at Micah 5. The idea is that as we look at this, we have to notice that there are certain things that make sense. Let me make one more point because I can't clear my mind of it since I mentioned Micah 5. In Micah 5, by the way, it is interesting that in Micah 5, it does mention Beit Lechem Ephratah, and it's talking about the birth of a child. When she who gives birth will give birth again. And the only person that is mentioned in context with any detail about being born at Beit Lechem Ephratah is the story that we're about to talk about, and that's Rachel. So Micah 5 does, in a way, in my mind, tie together with this story in Genesis chapter 35. And I should add that Jacob also mentions the Eder, Tower of Flock, Migdal Eder, which is only in Micah 4 otherwise. So that the story of Jacob is found in Hosea, as we've talked about, but it's also found in Micah. Now, Genesis 35, verse 20, and Jacob set up a pillar on her grave. This is, by the way, I'm going to come back and catch something. And he calls this the same as the pillar of Rachel's grave unto this day. Unto this day, Ad Hayom. There's another story about the, that's another anachronism. Rachel dies. They're on the way to Beit Lechem, and Rachel goes into hard labor. And when she's in labor, she names the son Ben-Oni. But as her life passes, she dies. The father changes his name to Benjamin, the son of the right hand. Now, Rachel has the child Benjamin here, according to this text. All the other kids, as far as we know, are born where? Padan Aram. Only Benjamin is born here. Now I want you to put a little note on your paper and say, but is that all that we have in the Bible? Or something like that, because I'm going to tell you one other point. The story continues. I'm wrapping some of this up. It goes from bad to worse. They fled the incident at Shechem. Rachel dies. Now we find that Reuben goes up and has sex with Rachel's handmaid, Bilhah. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Now look at chapter 35 and verse 22. The last part. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon and Levi and Judah and Issachar and Zebulun, the sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin, the sons of Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid, Dan and Naphtali, the sons of Zilpah, Leah's handmaid, Gad and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob that were born to him in Padan Aram. Anybody notice anything about that? The list includes Benjamin. But Is Benjamin born in Padan Aram? Or is Benjamin born in Bethlehem on the way to Ephrat? We have to pay attention to these details because they'll come back into our story. Jacob and the family, they bury Rachel. They put her in a grave that's indicated as such unto this day, which tells us that part of the story is later. And then they're going towards Hebron, still a southerly direction, right? Notice it says in verse 27, Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre, at Kiryat Arba, the same as Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac sojourned. Then it says the next verse, the days of Isaac were 180 years, and Isaac died and was gathered unto his people, old and full of days, and Esau and Jacob, his sons, buried him. So when he arrives at Hebron, it seems that he was able to at last see his father. From what we can tell, it's the first time he's seen his father since he fled. More than 20, we don't know how many more than 20, but certainly more than 20 years have passed. His mother's already dead. He sees his father dies. Then Esau and Jacob come together to the burial. Now the question is, does Esau come from Seir up to Hebron? Because in our story when we begin, Jacob and the family are here and Esau is here. Let's look at the geography and go a little bit further. Look at chapter 36. By the way, chapter 36 begins a new story within the story. Ele Toledot Esau. These are the bringings forth of Esau. Now look down at verse 6. 36:6. And Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the souls of his house, and his cattle, and all his beasts, and all his possessions, which he had gathered in the land of Canaan, and went into a land away from his brother Jacob. For their inheritance, their substance was too great for them to dwell together, and the land of their sojournings could not bear them because of their cattle, and Esau dwelt in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. This would indicate, this particular text, read it carefully on your own as well. We have to decide, was Esau dwelling in Edom and Seir prior, or at what point? Because it seems that the two brothers have grown together. It sounds very similar to the story of Abraham when he and Lot separated. Their cattle and their livestock and their things became so great. Here in the story of Genesis 36, Esau says he has to go away because there's not enough room for both of them, and he does. And he goes to this area, Seir. Genesis chapter 36 goes at length to cover Esau. It needs a lot more study. We don't have time to do it today. But the editor and the compiler is writing the history later, telling us from source text some things that we miss if we just read the text quickly and we don't pay attention. Geography and Esau's family merge in these texts like this, such that one doesn't know for sure without careful study if the people names led to the place name or the place name led to the people names. As we work through this, look at, I'll give you an example. I just read one, and Esau dwelt in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. Verse 9, these are the generations of Esau, the father of Edom in Mount Seir. So are we talking people, places? As I go through, I'm just going to read a couple of points for you to put in your notes or wait for John's notes. Verse 11 mentions Teman. Teman is one of these southern regions where God is coming from. God came from Teman. Chapter 36, verse 12 mentions Timnah. I've been to Timnah, this area, a lot of copper mines. The Edomites are very strong in this area. Some great scholarly articles on that. Verse 15 mentions Teman, the land of Edom. 17 mentions the land of Edom. This is what I want to go to as I get ready to close. Look at 36, verse 20. Look at this. These are the sons of Seir the Horite. Who is Seir the Horite? The inhabitants of the land, Lotan, Shoval, Zibeon, and Anah, and Dishon and Ezer and Dishon. These are the chiefs that came of the Horites, the children of Seir, in the land of Edom. So we get this idea that there's a group of people called the Horites who are living in this region, Seir and Edom. Now, are they related to Esau? And a lot of people think they are. They're not. Look with me at Deuteronomy chapter 2. Deuteronomy chapter 2 and verse 12. The Horites also dwelt in Seir aforetime, but the children of Esau succeeded them, and they destroyed them from before them, and dwelt in their stead, as Israel did unto the land of his possession, which Jehovah gave unto them. By the way, there's another anachronism, because Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 12 shouldn't know yet that Israel eliminated the people who lived in the land, right? But it says, yeah, the children of Esau eliminated these people, the Horites, just like Israel did. And you go, thank you. Look at verse 22. Verse 22, as he did for the children of Esau that dwelt in Seir when he destroyed the Horites before them, and they succeeded them and dwelt in their stead, even unto this day. So what we know is that there's a group of Horites who live in this region down here, and Esau, when he splits from Jacob, after Jacob is back in the land and so forth, Esau goes into the land of Edom and Seir and wipes out the Horites. And Genesis 14:6 mentioned this group as well. Now, once you get down to verse 31 of Genesis 36, there's a list of kings. These are the kings that were in Edom before Israel had a king. Again, that's an anachronism. There's no, this was written at a time when Israel did have kings. By the close of this week's portion, Rachel is dead, Isaac is dead, the boys have been reconciled, but then they split up just like Abraham and Lot did. The land couldn't support both of them. Reuben has slept with Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid. And that's, by the way, right on the heels of Simeon and Levi doing the massacre at Shechem. So you've got Reuben was the firstborn. He's out. Simeon and Levi are cruel and hateful. They're out in terms of the firstborn. The writer wants us to know this person disqualified, this person disqualified, this person disqualified. Who's next? We need a firstborn. The focus the author wants us to see is that our focus goes to the next rightful firstborn, a boy named Joseph, the firstborn of his beloved Rachel. Now, one verse I want to pick up, 1 Chronicles 5, verse 1. And the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but for as much as he defiled his father's couch, his birthright was given unto the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, and the genealogy is not to be reckoned after the birthright. So all our focus shifts to Joseph. That's what the author wants us to do. Don't look at Reuben. Reuben ruined it. Don't look at Simeon and Levi. They ruined it. Look at Joseph. Look at Genesis 37. You'll see what they want us to see here. Genesis 37 says, "And Jacob dwelt in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Ele Toledot Jacob." You know what the next word is? Joseph. These are the generations of Jacob is the next story within the story. But it's not about Jacob as much as it is about where the scribe wants to bring us next. So next week, we follow our ancient scribe's lead to the new firstborn, the one who now holds that position, to Joseph. Eli Toldot Jacob. Don't miss the next class in our series as we begin a new story within a story. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov, and just keep your eyes open, because I intend to announce with a great deal of detail the new project on the Pentateuch that I'll be working on. Shabbat Shalom. Have a great week.